Hey, it's Rachel. In this episode, I interviewed Thai Nguyen, and before I get into the episode, I just wanted to give you a heads up that Thai was actually in Peru when we did this episode, and so he was in a house with other people, and the sound quality was not always the best. I mean, it's mostly listenable, but if you're super sensitive to sound, I just wanted to give you a heads up, and I also just wanted to call it out because if this is your first podcast that you're listening to, I don't want you to think that this is normal. But because the rest of the interview was really good, we went over some really good things, I didn't want to not publish. So just wanted to give you that heads up. Hopefully you enjoy this episode, and here we go. My name is Rachel Rofe. I created this show because I wanted to help you see that if you have a choice, you can choose a better life. If you're listening to this podcast, you're in a pretty fortunate position. You have free will, ability to connect to the internet, and access to all kinds of new education. This podcast is meant to help you make the most of your good fortune. We talk with all kinds of people here from all walks of life because I want you to see that no matter what your situation, there's always a way to create a life that you're proud of. Hello everyone, today we're here with Thai Nguyen. Thai's life of chasing after dreams has led him to represent Nova Scotia at the National Canadian Rugby Championships, work as a 5-star chef for the Hilton Hotel, own a small cafe, and work as a private chef for a fine dining institute in Texas, where he cooked for folks like Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, and the Duggar family from TLC's 19 Kids and Counting. He lived in Thailand for a year and a half as a professional kickboxer and competed internationally in Canada, Singapore, Australia, and Fiji. Later, he moved to Texas to complete his bachelor's in humanities and start a master's degree. Going to school at a seminary, Thai was once on track for a life as a church minister, but deep down inside had the dream of becoming a writer. So now he's moved to Cusco, Peru to finish his first book. I first met Thai when he reached out to me after seeing my podcast hit new and noteworthy. I did some research on him, and I just really love the way he's been able to reinvent himself so many times, do so many different things, and achieve excellence in each area that he tries out. So I think we're going to be able to learn a lot from him today about mindset, dedication, and habits. Thai, thanks for being here.
Rachel, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Totally, this is going to be fun. One of the things I start out every podcast with is just the intention behind a better life, is just to show people that if they have a choice, they can choose a better life. So in that spirit, can you just take a minute to share with us some of the things that you're most proud of in your life?
Yeah, I think it's just being able, more so now than previously, I think I've been able to look back and actually appreciate the randomness of my life, and it does boil down to being a little bit of an ADD kind of personality. I guess I never appreciated the journey as much as I have now. And so it's hard to pull out one, but if I could just call it, the reflection on the journey has been like a big aha moment for me. I was always so focused on the destination, but it's only been in the last year that I've really embraced the journey. And so if I could answer it like that and just throw out embracing the whole journey as one big highlight.
Yeah, totally. So when you say embrace the journey, especially as somebody who has achieved excellence in so many different areas, you're obviously pretty goal-focused normally, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the big kind of flip for me this year, was looking back and realizing as much as the goal is important, there are a lot of times where I put a lot of pressure on myself and really took away from the beauty of the journey and didn't get to enjoy some of the experiences as much as I would have liked to.
So how do you do that now?
I think just really, I know it's cliche and I know it's something that's been thrown around a lot, but just really being mindful and being in the moment. And again, that gets thrown out a lot. So just, daily, just being very aware and very focused about all of the things that I get to do, and just being thankful for that, like waking up and just realizing, hey, I'm in Cusco, I'm living my dream. If I don't hit my writing target for today, that's okay. There's still this element of the journey that I get to embrace and celebrate. And really about celebrating the little things in life. That's been a huge part of it.
That's great. So do you have a practice around that?
Yeah. Every morning I write out my gratitude list. I get up and I go for a jog to this ancient ruin, which is really close to my apartment, and I meditate up there. I'm just giving thanks. I'm soaking that all up. I go back, and that's when I do my journaling and my writing. And I do this flow of consciousness writing where I'm just writing things out as they come to my mind and writing out 3 whole pages, but included in those pages are the things that I'm thankful for, just reflecting on my goals, but also just reflecting on what I have been able to achieve also.
Wow, that's a lot that you do every morning. How long does that take you?
It does take a while. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I usually get back from the run at about 7:15. I spend a bit of time up there. Sometimes I'll do a lot of stretching, yoga, just breath work, focusing on all of that. And then I come back, take a shower, and do the writing. So it does actually take up a fair chunk of time, but I think it really sets the trajectory for the rest of the day, and it's worth it. The days that I skip it, I feel off.
Yeah, I hear you. I am so big on having a morning routine, especially for people that have a lot of different things going on. It's sometimes the only thing in the entire day that's like the grounding stability. And of course, when you have your day set up in a way where you are doing things that are reminding you of what you're grateful for, getting you in touch with your body, you're sweating, all this stuff, the rest of your day is just going to be, there's going to be a landscape for positivity for the rest of the day. Whereas the days when you wake up, you don't feel like doing anything. I definitely notice the days that I miss my morning routine, same thing. It's just the rest of the day is kind of all over the place and I never really get my footing, and it's kind of just a wasted day, it feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we're honest with ourselves during the course of our day, if we were to calculate all of the times that we procrastinate, we're checking social media, if we combine them up, I mean, it'd be almost double the time that we spend for our morning routine. And so really, even though it is the chunk of time that we set aside, I think the value in it overshadows the rest of the way that we spend the day easily.
Totally. And I know that some people listening are probably like 2 hours plus, forget it, it's not going to happen, and probably feeling disconnected. So I'm wondering, what do you think are your if you could, like, if you only had half an hour to set up a routine every day, what would you do?
Ooh, half an hour. I would get up and do the meditation and the gratitude work. I think those have been crucial, and I'd try and squeeze in some short bits of exercise, so maybe just try and throw out a whole bunch of burpees or push-ups and get the heart rate going. Getting your body moving really just gets that blood flowing and ready to go. But I think there was some research done by, I think it's Sean Acor, and he has a book, I think, the happiness, something to do with happiness. I'll be able to find it and send it to you. But his research shows that when you start the day off with gratitude and with happiness, it really changes the outcome of everything. Traditionally, we view happiness on the other side of an activity, and as a result, I will be happy. But his research shows that if you place happiness before the actual activity, it completely transforms the level of productivity, and just the way that you do that is so much greater than if you put happiness on the other end. So gratitude, I think, is a huge part, and it seems very intangible. We live in a world that's so focused on materialism and to see results straight away, and that's why I think gratitude gets pushed to the side so often. It's because you can't see immediate results, but I mean, they're more subtle immediate results, if that makes sense.
Totally. And so I'm curious, as somebody who has achieved excellence in so many different areas and just reached the upper echelon in so many areas, what are some of the things that you found that help you the most? Is it the new journey? Is the morning routines? Have you always done that? Or is that something where, you're just experimenting? Because I know that sometimes to get us to the next level, we have to change direction.
Yeah, that has been something that I've always done. I think really the key in being able to achieve what I've achieved is honestly stop playing the comparison game with others. That has been crucial, and it seems sort of counterintuitive that everything we do needs to be measurable. But in a sense, taking away that measuring stick and taking away that game of comparison that we play with so many other people has been so liberating and so helpful in me being able to achieve success, because ultimately I'm not trying to one-up on someone else. I'm trying to one-up on myself. Like, it's this very personal focus for me. So everything that I do ultimately boils down to doing it because I want to do it, and doing it because I'm competing with no one else but myself. And that, I think, relieves a lot of pressure. I think we take on a lot of undeserved kind of pressure on ourselves by constantly comparing ourselves with others.
That's a great point. So then when you were in the rugby championships, for example, and you were representing Nova Scotia, when you first started playing rugby, were you thinking, I want to be on a team, or were you just thinking, I just want to get better and better all the time?
I grew up playing rugby in Australia, and I guess I moved over to Canada just because I'd had this love for traveling, and I had this dream of just seeing the world. So the rugby in Canada came out of a different dream. It just came out of the desire to travel. But while I was over there, I mean, I'd always had a desire to really pursue excellence in rugby. You know, I really wanted to turn professional back in Australia, which I wasn't able to do, but I was able to play at a high level in Canada. So it was constantly just having goals in different areas. Regardless of what I was doing, I would have a high goal and a high expectation that I was trying to reach.
Got it. Okay. So did you tell yourself that you wanted to be in the championships?
That just came out of just playing. I was playing a match for the senior men's competition in Halifax, and I played pretty well in that game. And one of the people watching the games was the coach of the Nova Scotia provincial side, and he found out that I was 18 at the time, so I was eligible to play in the U18 side. So he came and talked to me about playing afterwards. So it was really random, but again, you know, it was in that game that I was playing, I was still pushing myself, and I was still trying to achieve great things in that game. And I think that's a valuable lesson in itself, that we often don't know what's on the other side of the efforts that we put into things. And that's why it's so important to put in our best efforts in everything that we do, because we don't know what the result or what the outcome was going to be. I mean, I didn't know that there was a coach for the provincial side watching that game, but had I have slacked off, or had I have had lower expectations of myself during that game, that outcome wouldn't have come from the event.
That's a really good point. And so how did you even get into rugby? Were you just following what sounded fun to you?
Rugby's huge in Australia. Pretty much every kid grows up playing rugby, so it was just a natural thing. You know, your friends are playing it. So from a very young age, 10 or 11 years old, I was playing it. I guess it's comparable to American football or to ice skating in Canada.
Got it. So then you were a 5-star chef for the Hilton Hotel, and how did that happen?
I came back from that year of being overseas, and honestly, I didn't do well in high school at all. I was a bit of a rebellious kid, and I struggled with always fitting into the mold and fitting into, I guess, the paths and the concepts that society kind of has for us. And a part of me did feel as though I needed to get a conventional job, and it was the one thing that I had a little bit of experience in. But it was something I was still passionate about. It was something that allowed me to express my creative self in food. So, I mean, I look back and I enjoy it for what it was, but I don't think I would ever do it again, to be honest.
Yeah, no, totally. It's just interesting that you went straight to 5-star chef or the private chef or all these major or minor or whatever, but they're celebrities.
Yeah, it was interesting how it played out. I honestly never thought that I would cook again, but I think some of the things in our past find its way back into our present, and it was just something that I went through a few different times in my life.
So how is it, you have had all these different reinventions of yourself, and there's got to be, it's got to be tough to give up who you know yourself as and then start something new so often. I know there's a lot of people now that have these dreams deep down for something else, kind of like you were, deep down dreamed for being a writer, even though you felt like you were destined to be a minister at one point. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're able to give up who you know yourself as in order to get to the next phase of your life?
Yeah, absolutely, and that actually is a huge foundational point in the book that I'm writing at the moment, because it was a massive realization for me that, you said having to give up a part of yourself, and I don't think you have to give up a part of yourself, but it's more understanding the multidimensional aspects of who you are. So one thing that I really cover in the book is differentiating your values from your vehicle. So this is the point, the big crossroad that I came to, where, I thought about everything that was going on in my life, destined for this one path, but having this desire for something else. And so I stopped everything and I just thought, okay, what are the things that I'm really passionate about? What are the things that I value in life? It was connecting with people. It was having meaningful relationships. It was writing. It was evoking positive change in people's lives through the power of words. And as I looked back and I looked at these things that I was writing down, there was a sense of consistency all throughout everything that I'd done. You know, I'd always enjoyed having meaningful relationships with people. I'd always journaled and always enjoyed that. So I think it's understanding the multidimensional aspects of ourselves. There are things that are non-negotiables that we shouldn't compromise on, and those are our values. But then we look at our vehicle and what brings us those values. And I think those things you should allow yourself to compromise on, that you should allow yourself to quit on at times, that you should allow yourself to be flexible on. So your values are your core non-negotiables. Your vehicles are these different careers that pass through your life. And so for me, going through the chef career, that still was able to deliver me some of my values, my elements of creativity. As strange as it sounds, the fighting was still able to deliver me as a vehicle the different elements of creativity. You can actually be pretty creative in the ring with different combinations, different fight moves. And so realizing that life as a journey can be changeable in the elements of your vehicle, of your careers, but there's a sense of consistency in your values. So that was huge for me in all of these different reinventions, that I wasn't really throwing away myself or abandoning myself, but I was still holding on to the really important elements of myself, but I was letting this other area be flexible, which has allowed me to continue consistently through.
That's a great distinction. I think that's really helpful for people, that you don't have to, like, you can feel your core values in many different ways. And so I think that gives people permission to not have to tie up so much to one specific thing, which is great. And so I'm curious then, if you are feeling the values that you wanted to feel, say, while you were fighting, then why did you go and do something else?
That's a great point, Rach. I think my personality, I've always enjoyed variety, and that could be due to a lack of undiagnosed ADD or something, but also it ties into, I really truly believe that life is about change and variety and experiencing different things. And I think a root of a lot of dissatisfaction could be, I'm not saying this in absolute terms, but it could be because there's this massive focus from our culture to find that one job, that one meaning, that one purpose. I think there are a lot of things out there that's like, find your purpose, find your meaning, find that one thing. And I think that's a lot of pressure to put on people. And I think that breeds a lot of discomfort and a lot of frustration. So for me, when I found myself, I would just consistently find myself reaching to the end of something, you know, with the cooking. I had set goals there, finishing my apprenticeship, and once I reached them, you know, I was just like, I actually want to try something else now. And the same thing with the fighting. I got to achieve a few goals there, and I thought, you know, I'd like to try something else out. And so even though my values were still consistent through there, personally, there was just, I guess, an expiry date on some of these vehicles, and when they ran their course and I felt the desire to do something else, I stepped out and did that.
That makes sense. So for people who are listening that, like, I don't know what your financial situation was, and we can get into that, but I'm curious, like, for people who are listening who maybe have a job where they're making X amount of money, and so they feel like it's not easy to just give up the job to try something else, even though they might feel like you, like they want to try different things. Do you think that this works the same if you're just doing passions on the side? Or did you have a strategy around setting yourself up for stability every time you went and reinvented yourself financially?
Yeah, a lot of people have looked at my lifestyle and have thought I'm some sort of I've got like $1 million in the bank that I'm kind of feeding off, but you really need to set yourself up, and I think that's wise. I'm not saying don't be wise with money, but in my own personal lifestyle, I've never been rich financially, but I mean, the lifestyle that I lived, I feel like it's just eclipsed anything a monetary value could be placed on. And so I tell people, look, you don't need to be rich to live your dreams. I'm here in Cusco living my dreams, and it's just this constant, you know, being wise and having a fund on the side. I'd always make sure I'd never be in serious debt. I mean, at the moment, I'll pick up freelance writing gigs when I need it. There are a couple of websites that will pay me for articles. So I'll fall back on that when needed. And it was the same thing with the fighting. You know, I would get paid per fight and I would take fights when I needed. But in terms of financially setting yourself up or doing it on the side, I think we let that eclipse the experience a lot of times. We let the fear of stability and the fear of having enough money hold us back from stepping out. And I think you'll realize once you step out that those things have a way of falling into place. I mean, they have for me. I'm not advocating you quitting your job and just going out, although that's what I did and I'm doing okay. And if inside that's what your calling is, I would say that I'm doing it and I'm still alive and I'm not begging on the streets yet.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see your point. I think I err towards, and I'm usually the same way actually, where I'm just like, let's jump off on things and see what happens and just believe that everything's going to be okay. And if you're following your intuition and all that stuff, like it's going to all work out. Also, just for people that are listening and they have families and, you know, kids to take care of and stuff, I always, whenever I give advice, I'm always erring toward people having, I guess, plans to create income.
Absolutely. If I wasn't a single guy, Rachel, I think my advice would be completely different. It would err much more on the safe side. But I mean, from a single guy kind of perspective, that's what I've done in the past. Is just jumped out with not much saved up and being all right. But no, I completely agree with you. If I had family and kids, I think I'd be given very different advice.
And what advice would you be giving then?
I think it'd be wise to have a fund on the side saved up before you launch out, to have a safety net to fall back on. You know, ultimately, it's just going to be me that I have to get frustrated at if anything goes wrong. But if you've got kids and family, that's some added responsibility that you definitely need to take into consideration. So I would definitely have a safety net in terms of finances. And if I had family and I wanted to pursue this writing dream that I did, I would have kept my old job and really set aside time on the side, try and bring in, I guess, a part-time income through the writing before I even considered quitting the main job. So if I had family, that's what I'd do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is just, yes, it might be hard for people to go and quit their jobs and all this stuff, but if you wake up early and spend time towards whatever you're passionate about, that's great. If you go to bed late, whatever it is, it's a really good way to start just encompassing yourself with the feelings that you want to be feeling and feeling better about your life just in general, even if it's not like you totally give up your career right away. Or it could be something where you just get better and better until you can eventually quit your career while not having to completely lose all your stability.
Yeah, and there's an important point in that also of just gaining validation while you do it on the side. And that's something that I actually did before I actually quit. So once you're doing something on the side, that's a good time to really validate your idea and see if you're onto something. Because we all have passions and hobbies, and it's one thing to have them, but it's one thing to build a career on them, to bring in income and to bring in a living from that. So you really got to be honest with yourself and say, although I'm passionate about this, do I have what it takes to build a career on that? And that's something you can learn even if you don't have it at that point. But before launching off, I sent out a bunch of guest posts that were picked up immediately on some pretty large websites. And so that surprised me. But at the same time, I was like, hang on, people actually enjoy what I write. I may be onto something. And so before I launched out, I had that. And that would be something wise to do as well.
That's a great point. So if you're listening to this and you have an inkling that you want to do something, just start getting some momentum in that direction is really a great way for it to not feel like such a scary leap when you're ready to either do it full time later on or even just for it to not just be this thing in your head where you're thinking one day or someday or I should do this, but actually just getting leverage on it. One thing, I have a Facebook group called A Better Life, and we talk about just what's one small thing that you can do every day that you'll feel proud of today. And just taking those small little actions, they can really make your mindset just so much better.
Absolutely. I love that. Doing that one thing that can make you feel better.
So I know that you do mindset coaching, and I'm curious, what is the thing, or maybe top three things, that you feel like hold people back from pursuing their dreams the most?
I think it's familiarity. That's one thing. We don't like stepping into the uncomfort zone. And I had a friend tell me this quote that says that, people have become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And even when your comfort zone is uncomfortable, it's not where you want to be. It's not what you want to be living. It's not pursuing your dream. Even that uncomfortability is comfortable because it's familiar. Does that make any sense?
That actually does make a lot of sense. I've thought about that a lot. I have friends that are just super kind of like Burning Man community-ish. And I love Burning Man. And I know a lot of my friends there, they are very, it's always what's uncomfortable. Let's step on the edge of what we can do next, what we can do next. And that is there, once you're always trying to be uncomfortable, I think that can get sensationalized just as much, because then you're just never just appreciating what you have now. It's always what's next, what's next.
Yeah. And that becomes a comfort zone, a quote unquote comfort zone, because it's familiar. As humans, we're naturally drawn to things that are familiar. We find a sense of comfort in that, even when they're not the best situations for us. So I think that's one thing that really holds people back, like stepping into uncharted territory, and really just knowing the future is another thing. When you're in your job, when your next paycheck is going to come from, what work that you need to do, and just stepping out on your own feet can be a scary thing, but it's when you realize the outcome and the results of doing that so much eclipse the uncomfortable feelings of staying in that situation that people eventually overcome and step through.
Yeah, okay, so those are some good points. And so I think, just to step on the first thing that you mentioned again, you were saying how some people are comfortable feeling uncomfortable. And for those people, maybe the exercise is to try and figure out some stability in your life. Whereas people that aren't comfortable with being uncomfortable, then the exercise would be to go through and get okay with being uncomfortable, huh?
Yeah, and I actually do little exercises, and they're related to neuro-linguistic programming, and I've done some a course in self-hypnosis and hypnotherapy before. And visualization, the power of imagination and visualization and metaphors has been really helpful for me. So in terms of getting and overcoming uncomfortable situations, what I actually do once I go back from a jog is I have and it's cold here in Cusco, so I'll have a freezing cold shower. But before I turn on the cold shower, I begin to visualize and just use affirmations and tell myself, look, I can overcome any obstacle that presents itself. I will push through any difficulty. And I start repeating these affirmations. And then I turn on the blistering cold water and I endure that for about 10 seconds, and really creating this metaphor in my life and really ingraining it, not only neurologically, but physiologically in my body as well.
That's a really great point. I'd love to touch on what you learned when you were learning hypnosis. So like the neurologically, the physiologically, are those different things that they teach you to make sure that you're really helping make change, lasting change?
Yeah, I mean, there's been tons of studies in neuropsychology. One famous one is they've taken two groups of people, gotten one group to practice a melody on the piano, gotten the other group to simply imagine that they were playing those same keys on the piano, and then they brought them both together. And it was almost identical, the results between those who physically practiced and those who imagined, and athletes will use visualization in a lot of their training. But basically, the brain has problems telling the difference between something physical and something imagined. And you can get a little more esoteric with the visualization, and a lot of people will talk about how they've visualized their success before. But there seems to be this strange connection between our imagination and how things play out in reality. So back to with the cold shower, I'm using something imagined. I'm constantly imagining myself overcoming difficulties, but I'm also tying that into something that's very tangible, that's very in this world with the cold feeling on my body. So I'm not only visually telling myself and imagining overcoming difficulties, but I'm actually physiologically enduring it, pushing through. So it's kind of like combining the two elements.
That's a great call. And yeah, I think that is such a good point about the visualization. Have you read Psycho-Cybernetics?
I've heard of it. It is on my reading list. I will definitely have to pick your brain on it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you already know a lot of the main point of it, which is just about how powerful visualization is. If you do decide to read it, there's the older version and then the Dan Kennedy, I think, Dan Kennedy revised version, which is a lot less dry, so I recommend that one. It's amazing just how many studies are out there about the power of visualization and just having your mind go through and look at outcomes and play them out the way that you want them. And it's especially helpful when you visualize what you want, but then also feel the feelings that you would feel in that visualization. Super, super helpful. So I'm glad you brought that up. And that's something that I don't think has come up on the podcast yet, which is interesting because it is such a powerful piece. What's one thing in your experience that people don't usually share about improving themselves? Either it's not sexy or it just kind of doesn't paint this rainbows and butterflies picture that everything's great when you start working in personal development.
I think you'd agree as well. There are elements of the daily grind that, like I quoted, it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And I think Muhammad Ali's got another quote that's really profound in terms of the grind, but he says, the fight is won or lost, far away from weaknesses, away from all of the lights, long before I dance in the ring, something along those lines. I think I butchered it, but basically it's just saying that just the road to success really includes a lot of medial grinding away tasks, and it's easy to look at people's, I guess, highlight reels and base the whole experience off that. It's easy to look at Rachel and her success in her podcast and just see her cruising around in her nice fancy car and living that life and not seeing what's behind the scenes. So I think that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. Constantly the work that we do is very much in public, and it's easy to base everything off that small tip of the iceberg.
I think that is so valid, and especially coming from you, because you have gotten to so many different areas and done so well in so many different areas. And I really like that you acknowledge the grind, but then you also set yourself up each morning with gratitude and the exercise and all these things so that you always have a layer of a richness in your life. Does that make sense?
And I think what you mentioned earlier about just finding that one thing to celebrate is crucial to get through those tough times daily. Like if you can find one thing to be thankful about, I think it makes everything else worth it.
Totally. And I'm glad you mentioned the grind because, yes, for some people, they get to be in this period where they only do the work that they love and all this stuff. But I think a lot of times that comes after you have your initial hustle and you kind of like pay your dues to the universe or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though I get to tell people that I am living my dream, living here in Cusco and just waking up and just writing all day, I mean, there's elements of it where it's so tough. I mean, you're constantly drawn back into the temptation of going back to the safe zone, back to familiarity, back to the old job where, I knew how much I was getting paid. I was getting paid well. I had my housing covered. I had all of that. And it's a whisper in your ear constantly. It's tough. It's not easy. And that's one thing that I'm sure to tell a lot of people. Like, it's not going to be easy at all. It's going to be a tough walk until you can enjoy those moments that you're hoping to get to.
So when you're doing something and you're feeling like, ugh, I don't want to do whatever I'm about to do, and you just feel like every part of your body is just like, I'm not in the mood for this. Yeah. What do you do?
A couple of things. One thing that I've been constantly trying to do is creating these habits and creating the habit of pushing through uncomfortableness. So in the morning, constantly even trying to set my alarm a little bit earlier every now and then. I'm always trying to create these little scenarios that are going to build, I guess, muscle memory and build the habit of pushing through these stages that inevitably we will face. So every time I notice myself feeling like I don't want to get out of bed, that's when I jump out of bed and consistently trying to do that. And that's when the cold shower comes in as well, because I don't want to have a cold shower. But basically what I'm doing is creating all of these different habitual acts and metaphors to help with the times that I sit down and I don't feel like writing. So I'm creating this, I guess, strengthening that muscle to push through the laziness and the times that I just don't feel like doing it. But by creating these other acts, I think I'm really helping to push through that. That's one thing that I do, and I definitely would recommend people to do is create these little scenarios for yourself where you're becoming better at dealing with the times that you feel like crap and you just don't want to do something. You're building this discipline into yourself. The other thing is just remembering why I'm doing it, constantly going back to that. And the whole reason I left and came here is just my love for writing. And that's a question that you really have to ask yourself in everything that you do. You know, if the money wasn't going to come, which, I mean, I'm not saying that that's not an important element, it is. But if that isn't going to come, if everything else, the extraneous things, if they don't come in, would you still do what you want to do? And for me, it came back to the writing, and the answer was yes. You know, if all of the other success that I'm aiming for doesn't come, would I still love what I'm doing? And the answer is yes. And that has been really helpful in pushing through those moments.
That's extremely helpful, because if you're constantly engulfed in whatever your values are, it makes life a lot easier. And to touch on the first thing that you said, just about making things, like showing yourself that you can do things even when you don't feel like it, I think it's really helpful, because I talk about this book, The Slight Edge, all the time. It's amazing. And one of the biggest takeaways that I got from that is the road to excellence is made up of decisions that are easy to do, and they're also easy not to do. So it would be, it's huge. So it'd be so easy to go into just stay in bed or to do whatever you don't feel like doing. But when you just start building up that muscle memory of doing the things that don't give you that instant gratification, that's really when you start to just maximize your excellence. What would you say to somebody now who's listening and just struggling, feeling trapped by their circumstances?
I'd have to say, like, life is difficult. I think regardless of doing what you love and doing what you don't love, you're going to encounter difficulties, frustrations, struggles, obstacles, regrets. But at the end of the day, don't you think it's going to be better to endure all of that and still be able to do what you absolutely love rather than doing something that you don't love? That would be a question that I'd ask them. So anyone struggling, anyone kind of sitting on the fence, anyone that is asking these questions about whether I should or should not, I think ultimately when you lay your head down at night to sleep, it would be a much better night knowing that you did what you loved during that day, even though you endured difficulties.
Absolutely. And to add on to that, even if it's just taking that couple hours a day and just working on the things that you have values around, even if it's not your core job or whatever it is, but just something that you can feel proud of at the end of the day, have that is a lot better than living a life full of regrets. So it's great advice. So Thai, you've given some really great tips here. I think there's some really tangible takeaways for people. And can you just take a sec to let people know where they can go to find out more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and I definitely would love to connect with your listeners. So I write over at theutopianlife.com. I've recently started to focus a little more on Twitter, so you can find me over at Thai Nguyen, which is ThaiWins. So those are probably the two best ways to connect with me, but definitely I would love to hear from your listeners, and if there's any more advice I can give, I'm more than willing.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to A Better Life. You can find all show notes for this episode at rachelrofay.com. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe so you can automatically get access to all new shows. Let's also connect. Just go onto Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram /RachelRofay, and we can talk there. The opinions of all guests here are their own, and I'm not necessarily endorsing any of them. I do want to give you perspective though. And always remember, if you have a choice,